Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, we found out the Queen found an escape with horse racing. It was a way to get away from the rigid ways of being in the monarchy. In the world of racing, there was freedom, and it was fun and exciting. The Queen loved steeplechase racing, where competitors jump over fences and ditch obstacles. The Queen found it more exciting than the flat racetracks. Then we saw how the Queen Mother was regarding her finances and how she relied on her treasurer to keep her finances somewhat straight. She tried to cut costs, but she felt that she had to maintain a certain standard that was expected of the mother of a sovereign. So let's see what's going on today. One of the first duties that Treasurer Martin had to do was to go with the Queen Mother on her visit to Paris in March of 1956. She had been invited to open the Franco-Scottish exhibition at the French National Archives at the Hotel de Rohan. The Queen got a big warm reception. The visit was unofficial and hadn't gotten any advance publicity, yet the streets from La Bourget to the embassy were completely lined in places 10 or 20 deep. Queen Elizabeth opened the exhibition that afternoon with an expertly delivered speech in French, and after dinner at the British Embassy returned to the hotel for a French government reception. The next day she had lunch with President René Coty at Elysee Palace and then drove out to Versailles. While she was there, she was entertained to tea by all the Commonwealth ambassadors at the Grand Trianon. In the evening, the Jebs held a reception for her at the embassy, according to a report reaching Lady Salisbury, and they said she was dazzling. After the trip, the ambassadress wrote to the Queen Elizabeth, complimenting on her pleasure the visit had given. The people of Paris, and indeed of France, have always held the late King and your Majesty in very special place in their hearts, and they were truly glad to welcome you again. She thought that the visit had helped convince the French that they still had British support. Despite the public successes, private loneliness was always with her. To recapture the sense of family life, she made regular visits to Windsor for Easter, Sandringham for Christmas, and that was vital. When she returned to England and the disappointment of Devon Lock at the Grand National, Queen Elizabeth was grateful for her week at Windsor. She wrote to her daughter, the Queen, and thanked her so much for her sweetness and thought and care for your vulnerable parent. Above all, she treasured the companionship of family. She said, "You can't imagine how deadly everything is when one is alone. When one is young and one feels that life goes on forever. And I was utterly happy with Papa and you and Margaret." She hoped that the Queen would have more children. "I longed for more children, but somehow everything seemed against us." In 1957, in April, she went to the Castle May, where she got a hold of a television and watched some excellent, though rather foggy, pictures of the Queen and Prince Philip on their official visit to Paris. She told the Queen that she thought her clothes looked perfect. On the anniversary of her coronation, May the 12th, the Worshipful Company of Gardeners presented her with a replica of her coronation bouquet. This became a tradition which continued for the rest of her life. June 29th, she made a brief visit to France to unveil the Dunkirk Memorial Commemoration, the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force in 1940. Next was a major event of the Queen Mother's year. On July 1957, she left for another official visit to the Federation of Rhodesia in Nyasaland. Her principal duty was to open the new University College at Salisbury, the foundation stone of which she had laid in 1953, and to be installed as its president. Her role was significant because she was also Chancellor of the University College, which it was linked by. She was to tour all three countries of the Federation. Prince Charles, together with Princess Margaret and Princess Anne, came to see her off at London Airport and climbed aboard the Britannia aircraft to inspect the ingenious layout of cabins for the Queen Mother and her ladies-in-waiting, with couches, tables, and chairs which were converted into beds. Also on board was Queen Elizabeth's wardrobe on the tour that included 60 items, including 29 outfits with matching hats, 11 extra day dresses, and 4 extra evening dresses. They had a 21-hour flight, landed in Salisbury, and over the next few days, Queen Elizabeth went to a tobacco auction, visited a nursery school for African children, and received several deputations. On July 5th, she was installed as president of the University College of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. Her speech emphasized the high academic standards and the multi-race status of the new university. They traveled to Bulawayo for more engagements, and Queen Elizabeth attended a tribal gathering in the Matopos Hills. It was a moving and memorable occasion as the tribal sentinels stood with their spears and shields on the tops of surrounding hills. She was elaborately dressed for the occasion in a white lace dress with her garter ribbon and star and family orders, wearing a white hat adorned with white feathers and touched with garter blue. There were ritual dances of welcome, gifts, and acts of homage to Queen Elizabeth. Her speech of thanks was translated into 2 languages, and she invested 4 chiefs with the Queen's medal. Afterwards, the party flew to northern Rhodesia, first to Lusaka and then to Andola and the Copper Belt. In Luanshia, Queen Elizabeth dressed in a miner's kit of white protective coat, overshoes, helmet, and lamp, and was taken 1,500 feet down a copper mine, and the press was there in full force. At another mine in Kitwe, she was shown molten copper ore being poured in front of the furnace. She said unfortunately the wind changed at the crucial moment, and the whole party was nearly asphyxiated by sulfur fumes. She then drove through the African township and spent the night in the mining company's guest house. Her lady-in-waiting, Olivia Mulholland, commented that it was an exhausting but absorbingly interesting day. The Queen Mother on July 10th took a bumpy flight in a small, not very comfortable plane, a Heron, to the town of Broken Hill, where there was a reception and a lunch. She then decided to do a spontaneous walkabout like she had done with her husband in New Zealand in 1927. This got everybody excited, and she was given an ecstatic welcome. When she was back in Lusaka, she received a deputation from Queen Elizabeth's Colonial Nursing Service and then unveiled a plaque at the High Courts of Justice. She laid the foundation stone for the new Anglican cathedral, attended a garden party at the Government House, and presented silver drums to the 1st Battalion, the Northern Rhodesia Regiment, and watched the beating retreat. July 12th, she was on another flight, this time to Chiliki, where she was met by the governor of Nyasaland and Lady Armitage. She visited and named the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, had lunch with the Chief Justice, attended a garden party at the Lembe Country Club, and then had a pleasant drive to the Government House in Zamba. And it was pronounced by Olivia Mulholland the most beautiful place they had yet visited, with glorious views of the surrounding mountains. At an open public meeting for African chiefs from the whole territory, she delighted the crowd by appearing in a blue and white evening dress with a sparkling tiara, a mass of diamond jewelry, and the garter ribbon over her shoulder. More than 100 chiefs took part in the colorful and impressive ceremony, and the Queen Mother shook hands with each of them. In the evening, she decided to drive up the hair-raising road to the top of the Zamba Mountain to see the view and the wildflowers. The whole party repeated the experience the next day in convoy and had a picnic tea. The last day, July the 16th, was exhausting. There were several public engagements, a hot and dusty race meeting, and a state banquet. The party was then driven straight to the airport, with the Queen Mother still in evening dress and tiara. The Queen Mother wrote, "It was a most romantic departure as HM boarded the plane with the floodlights on, the whole thing looking like a scene from a musical comedy." They landed at London Airport in the pouring rain and were met by Princess Margaret. The Queen and Prince Philip came to Clarence House, and they all dined together before they all left, exhausted and somewhat dazzled, but confident that the trip had been a great success. The acting British High Commissioner reported home that Queen Elizabeth's tour had had a positive effect on race relations in the Federation, and Her Majesty emphasized again and again the pleasure of seeing all races. She said, "Now that these barriers of race prejudice have once been lowered, other people will be less fearful of trying to behave in a liberal way in the future." Next up, we have the Queen Mother's longest trip, and that was the beginning of 1958. And this was pleasing to the Queen Mother because she was to fly around the world before her very modern son-in-law, Prince Philip. But before she left, she was feeling sick after she and some other members of the family had a rough form of flu at Sandringham. She was invited by the government of Australia to open the British Empire Service League Biennial Conference on Canberra, February 17th, preceded by a 10-day visit to New Zealand. She flew out of London on BOAC DC-7 on the morning of January 28th. Her first brief stop was Montreal, where the plane landed to refuel in a blinding snowstorm. Her flight continued across the prairies and the Rockies to Vancouver, where she got there at 11:30 p.m. local time. The snow turned to drenching rain, and it was almost 24 hours after leaving London. She was tired, but when she landed, she said she was so glad to be there. She next traveled over Honolulu and touched down in Fiji on the afternoon of Friday, January 31st. There was no time for rest. First, she was accorded a formal reception by the governor and then by the mayor of Latuka, and was asked to watch a display of Fijian song and dance. After a short night's sleep, she took off for the last leg of her journey out to New Zealand, arriving in the afternoon of February 1st. She made a journey of 12,700 miles, was greeted by the Governor-General and Lady Cobham. Throughout February and the first week of March, she was on a busy tour of New Zealand and Australia. There were civic receptions, garden parties, inspections of schools and universities, farms and showgrounds, the presentation of colors to military units, luncheons and dinners with local and national politicians, church services, drives from the airport to the hotel, hotel to airport, and long convoys of cars. Sir James Shulton's assistant director of the Australian tour later recalled that her program was indeed very heavy and was saturated with events. The Queen Mother, still tired from the previous journey, had a reoccurrence of her flu symptoms in the Cathedral Church of St. Paul at Wellington. She told her daughter, the Queen, "My head started to go round just like it did in London before I left, and my knees trembled so much that the service paper rattled and rustled. It was really an agony, and the first time in my life that such a thing has happened to me." She felt the worst thing was being alone without anyone in the family. When one has someone either to help or to be helped by, nothing seems quite so devastating. Luckily, I shall be far too old soon for any more Australian tours. When she finally got over her illness, the Queen Mother enjoyed herself much more and wrote home saying how touching her welcome had been. The Australian papers, she said, were gossipy, but so far they're quite polite, and go on the old stories of how tired I am, and how much my feet hurt, and how tired the staff is, and how I must dye my hair, otherwise how could it still be dark, etc., etc. Quite harmless and quite funny sometimes. So I'm going to end the video here. In this episode, the Queen Mother made me feel exhausted with all her tours and traveling. She was in France, she was in Rhodesia, she was back in France, and lastly, she made a long journey to New Zealand and Australia. The last destination was jam-packed with programs for her to be at. She ended up getting the flu again, but she pushed on. In the next episode, we'll see more of her time in Australia, and that should be interesting. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it will help my channel to keep growing. As I mentioned before, I created a list of merchandise from Amazon that I thought you might be interested in, and if you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon page. If you purchase anything, I get a small commission that is of no extra cost to you. But more importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.